The value of nothing. Out of nothing comes something. That was an essay that I wrote when I was 11 years old, and I got a B+. But I'm going to talk about nothing out of something and how we create. And I'm going to try and do that within the 18-minute time span that we were told to stay within and to follow the 10 Commandments. That is actually something that creates a near-death experience, but near-death is good for creativity. So I also want to explain, because Dave Eggers said he was going to heckle me if I said anything that was a lie or not true to universal creativity. And I've done it this way for half the audience who is scientific. When I say we, I don't mean you necessarily. I mean me and my right brain, my left brain, and the one that's in between that is the censor and tells me what I'm saying is wrong. And I'm going to do that also by looking at what I think is part of my creative process, which includes a number of things that happen actually. The nothing started even earlier than the moment in which I'm creating something new. And that includes nature and nurture and what I refer to as nightmares. Now, in the nature area, we look at whether or not we are innately equipped with something perhaps in our brains, some abnormal chromosome that causes this muse-like effect. And some people would say that we're born with it in some other means, and others, like my mother, would say that I get my material from past lives. Some people would also say that creativity may be a function of some other neurological quirk, and Van Gogh syndrome, that you have a little bit of, psychosis or depression. I do have to say, I read recently that Van Gogh wasn't really necessarily psychotic, that he might have had temporal lobe seizures, and that might have caused this spurt of creativity. And I suppose it does something in some part of your brain. And I will mention that I actually developed temporal lobe seizures a number of years ago, but it was during the time I was writing my last book, and some people say that book is quite different. I think that part of it also begins with a sense of identity crisis. Who am I? Why am I this particular person? Why am I not black like everybody else? And sometimes you're equipped with skills, but they may not be the kind of skills that enable creativity. I used to draw. I thought I would be an artist, and I had a miniature poodle. And it wasn't bad, but it wasn't really creative, because all I could really do was represent in a very one-on-one way. And I have a sense that I probably copied this from a book. And then I also wasn't really shining in a certain area that I wanted to be. And, you look at those scores, and it wasn't bad, but it was not certainly predictive that I would one day make my living out of the artful arrangement of words. Also, one of the principles of creativity is to have a little childhood trauma. And I had the usual kind that I think a lot of people had, and that is that, I had expectations placed on me. That figure right there, by the way, was a toy given to me when I was about 9 years old, and it was to help me become a doctor from a very early age. I have some ones that were long-lasting from the age of 5 to 15. This was supposed to be my side occupation, and it led to a sense of failure. But actually, there was something quite real in my life that happened when I was about 14, and it was discovered that my brother in 1967, and then my father 6 months later, had brain tumors. And my mother believed that something had gone wrong, and she was going to find out what it was, and she was going to fix it. My father was a Baptist minister, and he believed in miracles and that God's will would take care of that. But of course, they ended up dying 6 months apart. And after that, my mother believed that it was fate or curses. She went looking through all the reasons in the universe why this would have happened. Everything except randomness. She did not believe in randomness. There was a reason for everything. And one of the reasons she thought was that her mother, who had died when she was very young, was angry at her. And so I had this notion of death all around me because my mother also believed that I would be next and she would be next. And when you are faced with the prospect of death very soon, you begin to think very much about everything. You become very creative in a survival sense. And this then led to my big questions, and they're the same ones that I have today. And they are, why do things happen? And how do things happen? And the one my mother asked, how do I make things happen? It's a wonderful way to look at these questions when you write a story, because after all, in that framework between the page 1 and 300, you have to answer this question of why things happen, how things happen, in what order they happen, what are the influences, how do I, as the narrator, as the writer, also influence that. And it's also one that I think many of our scientists have been asking. It's a kind of cosmology, and I have to develop a cosmology of my own universe as the creator of that universe. And you see there are a lot of there's a lot of back and forth in trying to make that happen, trying to figure it out, years and years oftentimes. So when I look at creativity, I also think that it is this sense or this inability to repress my looking at associations in practically anything in life. And I got a lot of them during what's been going on throughout this conference, almost everything that's been going on. And so I'm going to use as the metaphor this association, quantum mechanics, which I really don't understand, but I'm still going to use it as the process for explaining how it is the metaphor. So, in quantum mechanics, of course, you have dark energy and dark matter. And it's the same thing in looking at these questions of how things happen. There's a lot of unknown, and you often don't know what it is except by its absence. But when you make those associations, you want them to come together in a kind of synergy in the story. And what you're finding is what matters, the meaning. And that's what I look for in my work, a personal meaning. There is also the uncertainty principle, which is part of quantum mechanics, as I understand it, and this happens constantly in the writing. And there's a terrible and dreaded observer effect in which you're looking for something and, things are happening simultaneously and you're looking at it in a different way and you're trying to really look for the about in the story. What is the story about? And if you try too hard, then you will only write the about. You won't discover anything. And what you were supposed to find, what you hoped to find in some serendipitous way, is no longer there. Now, I don't want to ignore the other side of what happens in our universe like many of our scientists have, and so I am going to just throw in string theory here and just say that creative people are multidimensional, and there are 11 levels, I think, of anxiety, and they all operate at the same time.